if you're going to be a podcaster and get into this business, don't start by asking for money. Start by building your content. Start by building your audience. Do not start asking for money until people are asking you that they want to give you money, right? Wait till they're knocking the door down and then start your Patreon. But we started having people ask and we thought, maybe we could do this, just to bring it a little bit because we'd already spent a lot of money. Like, would it be nice to break even? And we started it and we said something very silly. We said, if you can get us to $500 a month, we will go weekly. That goal was hit in 3 days. Because it's too small of a goal.
Yeah.
So how about 5,000 a month? We'll go weekly, right?
Overpressure refers to the sudden increase in pressure above the surroundings caused by the wave generated when something explodes. It propagates outward from the origin, capable of causing impact, momentum, or disruption, depending on its intensity and distance. It is a critical factor in assessing the effects of a mission. Welcome to the Overpressure Podcast, where we dive into the explosive world of business for entrepreneurs who are vets or veteran entrepreneurs.
So guys, we have a really cool episode for you today on the Overpressure Podcast. I got to talk with Alan Sisto. He's coming to us from California, and this dude is awesome. We got to go really deep in his expertise on Middle Earth and how he's the host of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Hope you guys enjoy it. I know I did. Also, if you like it, hit like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Welcome, everybody. We have Alan joining us today, and I'm excited. He's been in the world of media in a couple different ways for a while, and we're definitely going to dive into that and challenges that, of course, come up along the way. So,
fair enough.
Alan, what is it that you do?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's really good to join you today, Austin. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this. I was telling you before we started that I'm usually the one doing the interviews myself because that's one of the things I do on my show. My primary role is as the lead host for the Prancing Pony Podcast. It's a podcast about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. So The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, all of that. And the show's been running for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in February. And it's grown more than I ever thought, to the point that it is now, along with its ancillary shows, my full-time job. So I've been able to take it from just a little thing I started as a hobby to now my full-time income source.
Very cool. And you guys have put together quite a little team over there. How big's the team now?
I've got about 6 to 8 people working for me, not full time, of course. I wish I could afford to have them be my full time team members, but all told, I have a social media person. I have an event coordinator because we try to do in-person events every year or two. I've got video editor, audio editor, graphic designer, all these people that work for me, and that's really what's enabled the show to continue, as I'm sure we'll get to when the questions start flying.
Well, I'll roll it back in my own life, and then we'll roll it back to how you got on this pathway.
Yeah.
And I'm probably going to mispronounce it. Silmarillion.
The Silmarillion.
Was one of the first books that I read as a kid.
Wow.
After what's the other series?
Oh, The Chronicles of Narnia?
Yeah. So
yeah, a lot of people read that.
Read not the movie, but I guess it's the first book in that series, maybe.
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or
one of them.
The first one chronologically is The Magician's Nephew, but Lewis didn't write that until later. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Magician's Nephew is I think the first fantasy book I read when I was 7, maybe.
Very cool.
Then I went into Silmarillion.
Wow. That's like going from the little plastic inflatable pool in the front yard to the Olympic diving pool. I don't know. That may be one of the most unique stories I've ever heard. I just went from The Magician's Nephew to the Silmarillion.
Yeah. I hadn't read a whole lot of anything. And then I, had my mom got me Harry Potter 1, and I was 11. And so I got to take that journey.
Oh, that's great.
At the same age as when the books were coming out.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So I've enjoyed the genre for a long time, and I haven't gotten to read a whole lot in the past couple of years. But
that's fair. I hear that.
Yeah. How did you get started in the world of audio visual production. Yeah.
Okay. I thought I was expecting the question I ask everybody, which is how did you get started in the world of Tolkien? And I was like, let me prepare that story. No, the story of how I got into media was an interesting one. And I'll kind of give you the basic background. I've always been a tech guy. I've always liked audiovisual stuff. You know, I used to sell, high-end home audio equipment, way back when I was in an undergrad. I've done, home theater builds. I've built my own gaming rigs and stuff like that for years. So very tech oriented, always that sort of AV geek. That as background, I had no idea that I would end up working in the field in any way, in any capacity. But there was a time in probably, I want to say, I've got to do some math in my head here. 2014, I think, when my business at the time, I was doing architectural photography for the most part. And I still dabble in it. I still have 2 or 3 clients that I work for on occasion. And I'd been doing that for over a decade. But where I discovered that the seasonality of that kind of work was really kind of hurting my bottom line. And there were times where I had time on my hands, but I couldn't just go get a regular job because they would want me to still work the next week when I had 3 shoots lined up.
Right.
So I needed something that could be gig work, so to speak. And a friend of mine suggested voiceover, or at least that I look into voiceover. And I thought, that might be fun. So later that year, I think in 2015, I started looking into voiceover, and I did some training and some kind of working with coaching, then produced a demo and started doing actual audio work, narrating the small things, corporate training videos, web explainers, short documentaries, primarily nonfiction, actually exclusively nonfiction. Did a couple of very, very small audiobooks that I look back on with almost embarrassment now. But that was 11 years ago and, 10, 11 years ago. And it was actually that experience that led me directly to the podcast. I'd been working for a little while in the field, and one of my coaches was explaining to me like strengths and weaknesses, where I was doing well, where I was struggling. And one of the things that they said I could improve on was conversational tone, like make it feel just more like a chat rather than, Gary Owens here with, the sort of formal stilted style. And I'd like to think I never got that bad, but the newsreadery style does come out when you do a lot of that nonfiction work. You're reading sort of technical terms, and you're doing these kind of almost intentionally boring things, which you're trying to make it sound interesting. And the suggestion was, to do some more commercial reads, you got to really be conversational. Make it just a talk. One way to get conversational, I was told, start a podcast. Don't worry, nobody will listen. So I was like,
10 years
okay,
later.
I guess I'll start a podcast. And now I hardly have time to do voiceover auditions. But yeah, it was one of those things where I just sat down and thought, okay, what am I going to do a podcast on? And that's really the beginning of the whole PPP story. But that's probably another question on your list. So I'll end that first one there.
Well, it's fascinating that, in the course of your normal career, you were able to pick up something that you were passionate about.
Yeah.
How much did that coaching play into really that transition? Because obviously it's been successful since then, but
it has.
How much did that coaching play in?
I would say the coaching encouraged me to stretch my professional boundaries a little bit, to do something that was outside of my comfort zone. For years, I'd been doing just the things that I liked to do, right? Even in photography. I liked doing architecture because it didn't involve people. There's nothing against people personally, but shooting them with a camera is very, you have to be able to give direction. And that's not my nature. It's not my wheelhouse. So I found myself doing product photography and architectural photography because it could take my time. I could approach it as a very left brain project, very, technical oriented rather than artistically oriented. And that's also playing to my strengths. So when a coach for voiceover said, try a podcast, I knew I was going to be stretching my comfort zone a lot because I was going to be talking to people directly, conversationally, as the whole point was supposed to be. And that really definitely opened my mind to doing something different. Once we got rolling, it didn't play much of a role because, the coach in voiceover is there to teach you more how to do a particular read. You know, if a client sends you an ad spot to audition for, they might give you some clues as to the tone or the approach or the style or things like that. But it's very narrow focus, so it wouldn't help me much with the actual technical chops of podcasting. In fact, I had to learn the ropes of that all on my own, like how to actually get a show onto the internets. You know, my co-host and I, thankfully, were able to sort of split our work up between us because we both were working full time. I was still doing the photography and voiceover, and Sean Marchese, my co-host who founded the show with me in 2016, was working a full-time office job. So we were both just doing this in our spare time and learning how to make a podcast. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So before we continue, we kind of have the lead up to your entrepreneurial journey with the podcast. Of course, have to hit on why the world of Middle Earth.
Well, that's one of the things that came to my mind early when I was, when it was suggested to me that I start a podcast. I had seen just recently, maybe a week or two before that coach had told me that, a TED Talk where one of the things they were discussing was, if you're ever going to do a podcast, it needs to be something that you can talk without a script for like a half hour. Is there anything you know enough that you're passionate about that you can talk about it for half an hour without notes? And I thought of about a half dozen things that I could talk about at the time. One of them was the then Oakland Raiders. And I thought, I'm too depressed already. I'm just going to drive myself off the edge of some precipice, because they're constantly losing. So I don't want to do a Raiders podcast. I'd always been big into politics and history. I was a history poli-sci major for a number of years. I'd actually ended up going to law school as well. And so I thought, okay, I could do politics, except this was 2015, 2016. And national politics was taking a shift that I didn't like to see. It was becoming very, very polarized very quickly. And I did not want anything to do with the venom that I felt I would be encountering, no matter what. I mean, if I take a moderate position, I'm going to be attacked from both sides. If I take one position, I'm going to alienate half my audience. If I take the other, I'm going to alienate the other half. So I just immediately shelved that idea. And of all the other ideas that kind of came and went, I thought, I really like Middle Earth. I love The Lord of the Rings. I'd picked it up. Lord of the Rings I didn't read until I was, I think, 14 in high school, but The Hobbit I read in 1977. I know it was before I was born. I was 9, so I'm giving
your
away
mom
my
was
age.
reading it too.
Yes, in utero, I was reading the Hobbit. Sadly, no, I was 9, and I'd actually seen the Rankin and Bass animated film made for TV in 1977, and I asked for the book for Christmas. So there I am, a 9-year-old reading The Hobbit. Absolutely fell in love with Middle Earth. I too had read the Chronicles of Narnia as well, and I loved Narnia, but this place just felt special. And it was another 3 years before I would come to discover The Lord of the Rings. The irony of that is, most books at the end say, if you like this book, you'll like these other books by this author. This book didn't have that. It was the version from the Rankin and Bass film, so it just had all their stills, all their drawings. Okay. So for years, I grew up thinking Gollum was a frog, and that the orcs looked like, I don't know, a cross between dogs and pigs. The weirdest animation style. Rankin and Bass Hobbit still has a near and dear place in my heart, but it's a little off when it comes to the way they represent the characters. So
is that the cartoon version?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that was really my first interaction at my great grandmother's house.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I had to have been like 5 because she didn't live much beyond that. We watched the cartoon.
Yeah. There were 2 cartoons from Rankin and Bass. One was The Hobbit in 77, and the other is The Return of the King in 1979, which was not
It was The Hobbit.
As good. Yeah, The Hobbit was a much better adaptation, in my humble opinion. But that's a whole other story. Get me started on adaptations. We'll be here all day. But I read The Hobbit, and then I read The Lord of the Rings. And when I read The Lord of the Rings, it just opened my mind to this incredibly huge world that every time you read it, and I started to read it every year, every time you read it, you learn something new. You see something new. You find something new. And not just like a new tiny bit of lore, but a new experience, a new emotion, a new takeaway, a life lesson, if you will. There were all sorts of these things happening every time I read. And I'd read them through, probably 2001 when the films started coming out. And then I saw the films, and like everybody else, I just kept watching the films, and I kind of stopped reading the books for a few years. And I had just changed that maybe the year before. And so when this idea came up to do a podcast, I thought, I think I want to do a podcast on Lord of the Rings, on Tolkien. And I started kind of looking around the space, and there's a guy who I now call a friend, but Corey Olson, who's known as the Tolkien professor, sort of, absolutely without doubt dominated the early space in Tolkien podcasting. He's literally a Tolkien professor. That's what he does.
Wow.
So he's incredibly intelligent, very informative, educational, very fun to listen to. And I thought the last thing I can do is ape this guy who's 1,000 times more knowledgeable than I'm ever going to be. So I immediately decided I wanted to do a 2-person format, make it a conversation, talk through it. And that's when I reached out to Sean Marchese, my former co-host. He and I did not know each other. We only knew each other on Facebook. We were in a Facebook group, about Tolkien. And I'd liked the way he'd written some things on these book week posts. And he was sharp. He was funny. He was making references to 70s prog rock and 80s movies. And I thought, this guy, he gets it, right? He's on my page. We think a little bit alike, and he's funny. So I reached out to him and I said, would you be interested in doing this podcast? And at the time we were both, look, we're busy. Maybe we do it once or twice a month. We'll work our way through the Silmarillion first because we're crazy like that. And, let's go ahead and do it and see what happens. So that's
cool.
How it all started. Yeah.
So where'd you guys take it from there? How did listenership develop? It's an early podcast at that.
Yeah.
And then how did it become a business?
That is a little bit of a longer story. So listeners, bear with me, I suppose. When we began, it was just intended to be a hobby. And we had, I know some people will say these are good numbers for a first episode, but when we had 130 people download our episode, we thought, well, this is never going anywhere. But it turns out that's actually not bad for a first time out, because we had reached out to the social media group we were in, which had like 5,000 members. And we're like, hey, we're starting this podcast. We'd love to have you join us. We did a trailer, which has long since been deleted. Thank God. I quiver to hear that thing. It's the most embarrassing bit of internet history that I've ever created. But we started with that small audience, but they were a passionate audience. These were people who were exactly who we wanted to talk to. Folks who love the Lord of the Rings, love Tolkien, maybe struggled a bit to read the Silmarillion. I mean, you said you were 9, I think, when you said you tried to read it.
Somewhere around there.
I can hardly believe that you would have worked your way through all of the elves and the lineages and the Fingolfin son of, all of it's so much for even people who've read stuff. Yeah.
It's fascinating on the backstory though. And I've been able to see that since then in all the movies.
Yeah.
And it gives you so much context.
It does,
I like history stuff too. So it wasn't a crazy stretch.
Okay. Because that is a history book, unlike The Lord of the Rings, which is a novel. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. And you're right about giving context. One of the things I love the most about reading The Lord of the Rings is getting those references to the earlier tales and realizing that until the Silmarillion came out in 1977, readers didn't know. So when Aragorn tells Frodo about Beren and Luthien on Weathertop, and it's a beautiful moment in the book, you're like, I don't know who these people are, but it gives the story a sense of groundedness, of history lived in. You talk about liking history. Tolkien himself talks about, I don't want a story that's allegorical. I prefer history. And I think the way he put it is, I prefer a history real or feigned. So he created a feigned history, a history that's, a lived-in world for thousands of years. So when you read the Silmarillion, you're reading things that happened thousands of years before The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And it is that historical sense that gives the world so much depth. That's why we started with it. Sean and I were talking about it, saying like, why, where do we want to start? And we actually started even more sort of introductorily with an essay that Tolkien once wrote on what it's like to write fantasy and what a fantasy story should be. It's called On Fairy Stories. And we actually started with that, but we were quickly into the Silmarillion by, I think, the 4th or 5th episode. And that's what we spent our first year and a half on, I think, from February of 2016 until September 2017. It was about 40 some odd episodes, and we were still bi-weekly then. And it was still hobby, because we were only putting in, maybe 5 to 6 hours of work before each episode and a couple of hours after to sort of promote it and share it. It was just us. We didn't have a team or anything. And we weren't, we had somebody help us come up with the art, and we just did simple stuff. But then over time, the audience started to grow. And during the summer of 2017, we actually had a few people say, how can we support your show? We'd like to give you money. Would you take our money?
Sure.
And frankly, that is one piece of advice I'm going to give now. If you're going to be a podcaster and get into this business, don't start by asking for money. Start by building your content. Start by building your audience. Do not start asking for money until people are asking you that they want to give you money, right? Wait till they're knocking the door down and then start your Patreon. Don't start your Patreon or your whatever it may be now, because there's a bunch of them out there. There's Steady for the folks, I think, in Europe. There's Supercast, that's purely a podcast crowdfunding. So I don't mean to say Patreon by brand. I just mean whatever it is you're going to do crowdfunding for. Don't start it until you got people knocking the door down. But we started having people ask, and we thought, maybe we could do this. Just to bring it a little bit, because we'd already spent a lot of money. Like, would it be nice to break even? And we started it, and we said something very silly. We said, if you can get us to $500 a month, we will go weekly. That goal was hit in 3 days. Because it's too small of a goal.
Yeah.
So how about 5,000 a month? We'll go weekly, right? We said it low because we wanted to do weekly. And our thought at the time was, we've been doing these 2 or 3 hour episodes every 2 weeks. So what if we did like hour and a half episodes every week? It's a little bit more, but it's not a lot more. And we're going to go to The Hobbit next, so it should be easier. Well, that's not how things go, of course. It ended up being a lot harder, and we dove in and got deeper and pulled more sources and started to get into things like the composition of the text. And so we just started doing more and more analysis and study of the text and of secondary sources. And we started bringing in guests from the Tolkien world, people who'd written books on Tolkien, or people who'd somehow been, associated with scholarly works or fan-based things. And then after that, it was the Lord of the Rings. And once you start the Lord of the Rings, that's a long project. So for those of you who've read the book, you know that it's really technically, as Tolkien calls it, one book in 3 volumes. But each of the volumes contains 2 smaller books. So you might see book 1 is the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring until they get to Rivendell. And then book 2 is the second part of the Fellowship of the Ring that takes you from basically the Council of Elrond to the breaking of the Fellowship. So there are 6 books with a lowercase b in the Lord of the Rings. And we did a full season, a full year on each one. Okay. So 6 years on the Lord of the Rings. And then last year, I even covered the appendices for a year.
Okay.
So getting really into the detailed work of, the history, the fun things, like what's in the appendices, things that you remember from the movies, like the tale of Aragorn and Arwen. So we got to spend, I think, 5 or 6 weeks diving into that story, or the backstory of Gondor, learning that they had a civil war in Gondor about 1,500 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings. So there's just all sorts of fun detail that Tolkien puts in there, and that's what we've spent our time doing.
Cool. And I know you guys now have a second show. What's that one really focused around?
Actually, I have a few other small projects. So there's the Prancing Pony Podcast is the weekly show. That's the big show. Then I have a daily show that's just me that I put out 6 days a week. And I do it for 7 weeks, and then I take 3 weeks off. So it's in little 10-week chunks. And that's called Today's Tolkien Times. And it's not just a podcast, it's also in video. So you can watch it on YouTube or listen to your podcast apps. And it's a short format show. It's like 8 to 12 minutes. And each of the days has a theme. So like Tuesdays are Tolkien Tuesdays. And I often will go through the letters of Tolkien, where Third Age Thursdays, I might be looking at the poetry in the Lord of the Rings, or artifacts in the Third Age, or something like that over the course of a 7-week series, or maybe 2 of those series. Each day has its own theme, and it's just been a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. I will say doing a daily show, even if it's short format, is still quite a bit of effort, but that's been a lot of fun. I've been doing that now for a little over 2 years. I'm actually coming up on my 100th week of content. Okay. So something like 600 episodes of that show have been produced. And then there's the Rings of Power wrap-up, which is a seasonal show that only comes out, as you might have guessed, when the Rings of Power comes out. Right. So on the seasons where that comes out, we usually start it up a couple of weeks before the show begins and talk about what we're expecting. Maybe we can get a guest on, and then we do reaction episodes after each of the 8 released episodes. And then we do a couple of ones after the season, maybe where we get a guest, or where we talk about maybe the season as a whole and give it a report card. We've done that twice. So we've got, about 35 or 40 episodes there. And then there's the PPP Plays, which is just a streaming show that I do twice a week where I play all things Middle Earth. So maybe I play Lord of the Rings Online or Return to Moria, or maybe I get a friend and we play Magic the Gathering, the Lord of the Rings, the card game, or I build a Lego set of Gandalf and the Balrog or something. So there's all sorts of things. I mean, anything that you can do fun in Middle Earth, I'll find a way to do it on PPP Plays. But that's a streaming show twice a week. And so with all 4 of those combined, it's become full time. But now I've skipped ahead, so I'll have to go back in and fill in the gaps.
I mean, there's another big category. You have voiceover work and podcasts and shows, and you're an author as well, right?
Oh, yes. I totally forgot. So Sean and I, when he was still working with me, and I'll get to more of that as I'm sure when we start talking about like the pressure situations that led me to where I'm at. Yeah. When he was still with me, we were approached by a publisher, because he and I had talked about, when the podcast is done, we'll write a book, because we don't have time right now. And then we get a call from a publisher saying, we think we could sell your book. Would you be willing to write a book? And we thought, well, I mean, if you're going to pay us to write a book, then I think we can write a book. So we wrote Why We Love Middle Earth, and it's a very fan-oriented sort of, we wanted to be able to welcome new people to Middle Earth. We knew that the Rings of Power was going to bring folks to Middle Earth that maybe had never experienced it before, or maybe had only seen the Jackson films. And we thought this is a perfect time to sort of open the door and say, come on in, we want to be non-judgmental. We don't want to be gatekeepers, even though we have opinions, and the opinions are not always that every adaptation is great. We're very honest about that. But we don't think that because an adaptation is less than it should be, that it means the people that come into the fandom through that adaptation are any less valuable or worthwhile than the other fans. Fans are fans. And I want everybody to read the books. I want everybody to get to the Silmarillion and learn and love it the way I do, but I know that's not going to happen. So in the meantime, let me just welcome folks to the fandom, teach them what they want to know. And that's the way the book is organized. There's an entire section on the works themselves. So there's like a chapter, sort of an intro to who Tolkien was, a very brief biography. And then chapters on the major works, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, chapters on the smaller works like Unfinished Tales, and a discussion of history of Middle Earth. I say smaller, that's huge. It's 12 volumes, but it's small in terms of number of sales compared to The Lord of the Rings. So the lesser known works, and we talk about what they each contain, what you might enjoy. If you like this, then you'll want to read this. If this is what you get into, then you might want to tackle this book. We talk about reading order, all of these things. And then there's a second section on adaptations where we walk through everything from the Jackson Lord of the Rings films, the Jackson Hobbit films, the Rankin and Bass 2 cartoons, the Bakshi Lord of the Rings in 1978. We specifically didn't touch the Rings of Power adaptation in that book because only 1 season had come out. We didn't feel like that would be fair. And we thought by the time there's a sequel due, then we should have 3 or maybe even 4 seasons out, and we can talk more thoroughly about it, more fairly. But we had to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. I think I probably have 6,000 words already written on a chapter about video game adaptations set in Middle Earth that we just ran out of room for. So I've got that halfway written. And then we had a third section just on the fandom. So things you could do, like Do you like cosplay? Well, here's some cool Tolkien cosplay opportunities and events. Do you like to study Tolkien? You want to get a degree in Tolkien? You can go do that. Do you love the languages like Quenya and Sindarin, the Elvish languages that he invented? Oh, here are some resources for you and how you might enjoy exploring that field. So we know that the fandom has so many opportunities for so many different people. And that's really what we wanted the book to be, was a love letter to the fans of Middle-earth. There's still enough in it that even grizzled Middle-earth veterans like myself can get in there and still find new things and learn and enjoy. But mostly it's a love letter to the fandoms. I'm sorry, try that again. Mostly it's a love letter to the fans and to the fandom in general. And then, of course, it's also a love letter to our fans. You know, we wrote the book very much like we speak the podcast. You can hear our voices quite literally. Actually, you can very literally hear my voice because I narrated the audiobook. So there's that as well. We wanted to both do it, but the publisher, I shouldn't say the publisher because they sent it on to an audiobook production company. The audiobook folks were like, you can't have both of you do it. They just did. I guess it's too much money to send him to one studio and me to another and edit it all together. So we had to pick one. And since he would have had to come all the way out to LA from where he lives in Texas, Sean had to pass. So I chose it. And, I'm close enough to LA that it wasn't that big a deal. So it was a fun thing to do. I will say that.
So doing all of these different things over, I'll call it a career of 10 years in the world.
In this world.
That cannot have gone perfectly. So what are some challenges that have come up, whether it be just figuring out the tech side?
That was a real challenge, I have to admit. The first couple of years as we were navigating the difficulty of how do we get a podcast hosted? How do we build a website? Because we were doing everything ourselves. How do we do, Patreon? How do we spread the word? How do we get involved in other communities and, let people know about us without just being blatantly, here's our podcast, listen to it. Right. So we took time to engage in these communities and engage in conversations about Tolkien and mention, hey, we talked about that actually on our episode here. And, so we're just being a valued part of that community without just coming in and taking advantage of them. It was just, it made it more organic. It took more time, but it helped, I think, grow a steady fandom, a steady base of listeners, and it has continued to grow. And the cool thing is, because it's an evergreen subject, right? Because it's Tolkien and the work is not going to change. This isn't like the Raiders podcast where once you've listened to an episode, you're never going to listen to it again.
Right.
But instead, people will listen again and again. People who discover us now, they're not going to just start listening now. They're going to go back to season 1, episode 1 and listen now to almost 400 episodes of Tolkien. And that gives us, an opportunity to build community with those people. And that's really what the show's been about. But that's a different answer because you didn't ask the question about that. You asked the question about the difficulties. Tech was one of them.
let's dig into the community real quick.
Sure.
Before we go back to challenges.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys have built a community and that takes time. It takes providing value. Did you guys set an intentionality behind that?
Not initially.
Okay.
How long did that take? Very early on. Like when we realized there were people listening to our show. So like 4 or 5 weeks in, it became all about whether this community is 100 people or 1,000 people. We want these people to be welcome. We want them to feel like they're engaging with us directly. And so we did. We spent a lot of time in our social media channels, building relationships with people, building that community. And we found that the best way to tell people about our show is to have other people tell them about the show. Evangelists, if you will, folks who will go to these other communities that we don't even necessarily know about and say, you got to check out this podcast, right? You like Lord of the Rings, you're going to love these guys. They are great. Those people are the most useful way of reaching new people. And so we just want to create a warm and welcoming place. Very early on, we decided we were not going to be gatekeepers. There's a lot of gatekeeping in every fandom. The Tolkien fandom does have a sort of notorious sort of reputation for that. You like the films, I see. Oh, well, can't really call yourself a real Tolkien fan then, can you? Well, of course you can. It doesn't matter whether you've never read the books. You like the world, you like the films that are based on the world built by Tolkien. No, it's not perfect. No adaptation can ever be perfect. We get that. But that doesn't make the fan any less important. And so we wanted to create a very open environment where people would feel welcome and safe, and can talk about their love for Middle-earth, no matter how deep it is or how new it is or how old it is, for that matter. I mean, one of my favorite people in the early days of the show is a cranky old guy in his 70s in the UK who was very much a book only guy, but I loved him dearly, and because even though he had that approach, he was still respectful and kind to other people. And that's the sort of place we wanted to build, was just warm and welcoming and safe for fans. So that has been very intentional. And it's been a big part of how we hired our team, which I'll get to when I talk about some of the hurdles that I've run into, because that was one. And we just, every step since then has been making sure we build community. How does this build community? And that's been a really rewarding aspect of it. It may have, in some ways, it may have cost us in the sense that we didn't focus on growth. We focused on community. But what it does mean is the growth we're experiencing is very real growth, and it stays.
Sustainable. Yeah,
exactly. Sustainable. Yeah, 100%. I mean, sure, we could do things like, increase our ads and do more pushes and do more postings on every social media known to man, and possibly get a boost in listenership. But by making the community a place people want to stay, then when those people come in, they do exactly that, no matter how they get there. So yeah, It's been good. We really love our people. Yeah.
I mean, on the same subject of people, like challenges with team, we talked about it a little bit before the show. Like, what has been the challenge with team as things have progressed? I know you guys went through some stuff during COVID. What's the story behind that?
That was the first big hurdle, right? We had small hurdles all along from 2016 to 2020. Oh, like, are we going to be able to? We were invited to come speak at a Moot. We're like, how are we going to raise the money to go to this? For those who don't know, Moot is basically like a conference. It's like a combination academic convention or academic conference and fan convention. It's people give talks and papers, but there's also, all sorts of fun events and usually a pub crawl, depending on what city you're in.
Any kings elected?
We do have some. Yeah, there's usually a karaoke king. We have all sorts of fun at these events. Trivia! My goodness, that you will never have as much fun as you will at one of our trivia events. But these moots, it comes from the idea of the Ent moot. So if you've ever read the book, you might remember Treebeard talking about the Ent moot. And it is an old English word that does mean, a gathering. So we have these moots in the Tolkien community, these events, and we were invited to go to one, and we had no idea if we could afford to go, right? It wasn't like we were being, paid to go. We weren't even getting our expenses paid. We were getting the event covered, but we had to get ourselves there. We had to, cover lodging and all this other stuff. So all those little small technical hurdles were nothing compared to what happened when COVID came along, because first we thought we're going to really struggle for listeners, because our demographics, our data showed that people were listening at the gym and on their commute. So we're like, well, crap, people aren't going to do commutes or gyms for a while now. Fortunately, it turns out that fear was ungrounded. Our numbers actually started to increase. But the challenge was that around that same time, we'd gone from, over the course of the previous 3 years and change, we'd gone from a small hobby podcast that each of us was putting in 5 to 10 hours of work per week to a weekly show where we were each putting in closer to 15 hours of work, which was a challenge for me, but was even harder for Sean. And in all fairness to him, he had a traditional 9-to-5 job. It was, with a higher pressure sort of environment. So he called me up in I want to say April or May of 2020 and said, listen, initially he wanted to quit. And I was able to say, well, let's talk about it. What is it that's making you feel like you need to quit? And he was talking about the amount of work that we were doing. And he felt like he needed to do 50-50. You know, it was our show. So he needed to, so every time I would step up and do something new, he felt he had to step up and do something new.
Right.
And I get that. I felt the same thing. And I'm sure there's a little bit of that driving a lot of what we were doing. We both wanted the show to succeed. So we were both putting more and more effort into it. But what we decided after a long conversation was, you know what? It's okay. We don't have to, maybe we don't split the revenue 50-50 anymore. We actually have to do some math. I'll track my hours, you track yours, but let's take all of these responsibilities that we have. Let's put them in a hat, figure out which ones you want, figure out which ones I want, and the other ones we'll hire team members. So like, for example, I used to do all the editing for seasons 1 through 3 or 4, I think through 4. And that was very time consuming. A 2-hour episode would take me 5 hours to edit because I'm not an audio editor, you know, even no matter how much I developed that skill, I wasn't super fast at it. And I'm also very picky because it's my own voice and I got kind of, you know, a little too perfect. So I thought, okay, if I offload that, if I hire an editor, then that gives me time to take on something that Sean used to do. Maybe it's writing the titles and blurbs because that used to be all him, or maybe it meant writing more of the episodes and things like that. So we reshuffled the workload. I took on what was basically 2/3 of the work, and he took on around 1/3, with the rest of the tasks being moved off. I guess I should have said that we moved some tasks off and then I took 2/3 of what was left, because otherwise the math doesn't work. But you know what I mean? I mean that we offloaded things like social media management, website maintenance and upgrading, and audio editing. We immediately found, and handling our Patreon fulfillment. So when somebody has been on the tier for 3 months, so they get a free t-shirt, right? I needed somebody to track that stuff and send the stuff out to our people, because that was another time consumer. So we just looked at all the various tasks that were taking us too much time, said, let's farm some of those out, and then we'll split up what's left, but we'll split it up 2-to-1 instead of 50-50. And that worked really, really well. It enabled him to drop down to about an 8-hour time investment every week, maybe a little less, so 6 to 8 hours. And I should say per episode, not per week, because we typically only put out 42 to 43 episodes a season. So we would take off like 5 weeks during the summer, and then we'd be off for Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter and stuff like that. So that was hurdle number one. And we overcame that. And you combine that with then what became an increase in numbers because of COVID rather than the decrease that we feared. And we ended up starting to see a really big growth both in listenership and in Patreon support. We also started to see, because our numbers had gotten a little higher on the actual podcast, we started to see advertisers be more interested, because advertisers, they're not going to give you the time of day until you've got a certain threshold, unless you're very good at pitching yourself and you can really get through to somebody. It's very difficult. Some people are natural at that. Great. Go for it. If you've got a super niche show, you know, you're doing a farm equipment show. Yeah. Go talk to John Deere, you know,
but they're going to want it,
you know, they're going to want to get a piece of that, even if you only got 1,000 listeners, because if they're all farm owners, they're going to buy their stuff. But for an average general audience show like Tolkien, you know, I thought we could be able to get people like Amazon or Audible or, you know, anybody who works in the world of books to come and be a sponsor, but that just wasn't going to happen. We weren't a large enough show yet. But after 2020, we started to see that change. We started to see people come after advertising opportunities. And that's never been a huge piece of our revenue pie. It's about 25% of my pie now. And it's getting to be a little bigger, but it's always been for us Patreon. It's always been crowdfunding, because we want to be responsive to our listeners. And we get about, I think my conversion rate right now is around 7 or 8%. So out of every 100 listeners, 7 or 8 of them become subscribers. And, you know, I'd love to get that closer to 10%, of course. But, you know, it is what it is. I totally get it, especially in this economy. So, you know, we're just grateful to have folks come along for the ride, however they do. But that was the first big hurdle. And then as the money started coming in a little bit more, we knew it was never going to be enough for us both to quit, right? There's no way that the show's going to bring in, you know, $300,000 a year or something like that, so that we can pay a team and each still take home livable money. I live in Southern California in Orange County. You know, I'm not going to be able to survive full time on a $50,000 a year, income. That's just not going to happen.
Fair
He lives in Austin, which isn't a whole lot better.
Yeah.
Some parts of Texas might be a little more affordable, but not where he's at.
Not Austin.
So no, definitely not. So we were realistic about that. And we're like, okay, so it's never going to become our retirement check, but you know what? It's pretty decent money for, a second thing, for a side hustle, if you will. But it was taking still more and more work, because the further we got in, the more we were discovering and the more effort we put into the show. And I even was the one to first propose a daily show, I think back in 21. And Sean was like, I cannot do a daily show. I don't care if you write it, promote it, publish it, and do everything. The only thing I do is show up and record. I can't do it. Right. And so I said, okay, shelve that idea, thought about it for another time. But then we decided when Rings of Power was coming out to start Rings of Power Wrap Up. And I think that was sort of the sign for him. Like, he realized doing more was just too much, and it was costing him too much in other areas. And I don't want to speak to his reasons too much, because that's not my privilege to do, but it was just real life demands were too much for him to keep working on the show. So I get a call. I'd say it's out of the blue, but in hindsight, I probably had some inkling. I got the call at the end of July of 2022. I had just come back from San Diego Comic-Con and all the Amazon events for season 1 of Rings of Power. And I get a call from Sean, and he says, man, I don't want to have to do this, but I'm going to have to quit the show, and I'll record a farewell episode to start the next season. And then I'm going to be done. So I'm sitting there scrambling, thinking, what do I do? Right. At this point, this is the crisis, right? This is the moment where either the show dies and I go back to trying to do VO and photography full time, which was going to be a challenge because I've already sort of let my photography business wither a little bit. Like, I hadn't grown my client base because I didn't have time. I couldn't do more than, I don't know, maybe a shoot every month or two, So I had 3 clients that I was doing steady work for, and that was enough for me. But it would have been really a challenge to build that back up. Voiceover, that's one where it could have been fairly easy to go back, because that is a numbers game. You do X number of auditions and you get 3 or 4% of the auditions as jobs. So the more auditions, the more jobs. So that I might have been able to do, but it would have been a real grind. So, okay, how do I make this work without Sean? It's never going to be a solo show. Like, that never crossed my mind. Okay. The only thing that crossed my mind is who's going to be my co-host. And honestly, the stuff that we did in summer of 22 in preparation for Rings of Power season 1 proved to be the catalyst for what I ended up choosing to do. Earlier that year in May, Sean and I had been flown out to London by Amazon, along with about 25 other content creators of various kinds, folks on Instagram, TikTok, podcasters, Corey Olson, several others, Sean Gunner, the chair of the Tolkien Society, other people in the Tolkien fandom, had been brought out to London. We got to meet the show. We couldn't talk about it. We couldn't say specifics at the time. I can now. The NDA has long expired. Right. But we were shown 20 minutes of footage. We got a sit down with the showrunners. We got a sit down with John Howe, who's the concept artist, who is, of course, one of the concept artists for the Jackson films and a very well-known Tolkien artist. We got to sit with Leith McPherson, who's the language consultant, as well as the production designer at the time, and plus the footage. And then they took us up to Oxford for a day, and we just got to do all the Tolkien stuff up there. And it was a fantastic trip. But what made it good for me, what made it useful for me, was that I got to meet all these people that I hadn't ever met face to face, or only met once or twice. I'd met Corey, I'd met Sean Gunner, who heads up the Tolkien Society that runs an event called Oxenmoot every year in Oxford. Corey runs Signum University, which hosts the Mythmoot event that I attend, usually in June every year on the East Coast. So I knew of these people, and I'd met a few of them before, but some of them, especially the younger folks that were more Instagram, TikTok, social media influencers, you might say, I didn't know. I'd only known of them. So I get to meet folks like Don Marshall, who's known as the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy on TikTok. I got to finally meet Matt, who's the Nerd of the Rings on YouTube with over 1 million subscribers. I got to meet I'm trying Nubeta Dubeta, who's on TikTok, super cool guy out of New York, who's just this genuinely authentic. Maybe you've never met anybody more authentic in your life. He doesn't have a filter. It's great. I got to meet a whole bunch of really cool people. And so when Sean had to step down, I thought there's nobody that can take his place. That's the point. Nobody can take his place. So let's bring in multiple people one at a time. Let's rotate. Let's do temporary co-hosts. And so I reached out to about a dozen folks and I said, would you be interested in taking a chapter of book 5 of The Lord of the Rings with me? Book 5 is where the action happens. This is like the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the Siege of Gondor. All of this stuff happens in book 5. It's super exciting moments. And so, yes, people said, and I was shocked. Like almost everybody I asked said, yes, I would love to do that. And I'm ever so grateful to Corey Olson because he's the one who was the Tolkien professor I told you about earlier, who had already, an experienced Tolkien podcaster when I got on the scene in 2016. He reached out, and when I was talking about who wants what chapter, he goes, I want the first one. I think your fans it'll help your fans adapt to not having Sean be there anymore. Like there's a lot of familiarity because he's been on the show a couple times with us.
That's great of him.
And it was super huge. It was such a help to me because I knew that whatever poor soul was coming in first, like I've got to fill Sean's shoes. He's been on the show for 6 years. I don't have that. None of them have that rapport with me. I mean, you spend that much time working every week with somebody on one single topic and you start to read each other's minds, finish each other's jokes, tell each other's puns. It was eerie. Like we just were the two halves of the same person in many ways. So Corey comes on and takes that first chapter, and then we just went chapter by chapter with different co-hosts. And it was such a wonderful experience. And I think for me, the coolest thing was the community aspect. So we come back to community because now I'm reaching out to new communities. And sure, maybe some of them don't like the show. That's not their speed. They like the 5-minute content or the video content. So maybe they don't come over, but some do. And what they find is a community that's warm, welcoming, and safe to be in. And every listener was able to enjoy the different co-hosts. So some more than others, and I'd get some feedback here and there. And that was interesting. But, you know as well as I do, the people that write the negative things, they only represent a small portion. You can't listen too much to them. I know. So I just like, well, all right then. Thanks for letting me know, So it was good. But that was the biggest challenge by far. And it's worked out ever since. That's the same format that we've used. I have shrunk the number of co-hosts down in order to build that rapport. So there's like a rotating group of 4 now that I typically bring in, both last season, actually the last 2 seasons and this season. Season 7 was too many people. I think we had 10. And that just never gave anybody more than, I think, 3 to 5 episodes. That's not enough to build rapport. It's not enough for me to learn how to write for them and for their voice. So that was a little bit of a hurdle, but we got through it. And ever since then, it's been me and the temporary co-hosts. And what that's done from an entrepreneurial standpoint is it's enabled me to do the solo projects like the PPP plays and Today's Tolkien Times. And those, Sean still certainly gets a share of the episodes that he did in terms of like ad revenue and things like that. It means that now I receive most of the revenue. So I pay my team and then I pay myself. And it's that combination of things that has grown the revenue to the point that I'm able to do it full time, which is a dream, a real dream.
Well, thank you, Alan. It's been awesome hearing about your community. Where can people go to possibly join and get deeper into the world that you live, breathe, and talk about?
Yeah, as you can see behind me, that's just like some of my book collection of Tolkien. The podcast itself, the Prancing Pony Podcast, just look for that on all of your podcast apps. It's everywhere. On social media, we are at Prancing Pony Pod on every platform you can find us on. You can even find our subreddit at r/Prancing Pony Pod. Today's Tolkien Times is on YouTube and on your podcast apps. But again, following at Prancing Pony Pod will get you all of that. Same thing for Rings of Wrap Up. I'm sorry. Same thing for Rings of Power Wrap-Up. Again, you'll find us at Prancing Pony Pod. We've simplified it, so all 4 shows are under the one social media channel at Prancing Pony Pod. So that's where you can find us. And I hope you join us. And then, of course, Patreon, that's where you're going to get to be part of our Discord community. That's like the creme de la creme of the community. Like, you think the few thousand people that hang out in our Facebook group are awesome, and they are. The best of them make their way to the Discord, and we've got 600-700 people in there that are just incredible.
Discord's where it's at.
It is. It is.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, man. I really
great
appreciate
rest of your week, and
you too.
I'll have to brush up on my own lore and history.
Well, now you've got a personal Tolkien consultant if you ever have a question.
Cool.
All
See you,
right,
man.
Take care. Thank you.